Good morning, folks. Welcome back to episode 4 of Stick Figure Theology. And once again, Dawn Reeves is here with me this morning. And I would just like to open us up in prayer and just to let you know that we're doing these for personal testimony, really just to take out and to share with you guys what God is doing in our lives and really corporately at Christ the King also. God moves how God wants to move, and He's really ushered in this desire in my heart to give people a platform of which to share what God is doing in their lives, which is what testimony is. So if you would, just let's bow our heads and we'll open in prayer this morning. Father God, we just thank you for allowing us to be children of the living God. You've put us here to worship and to share testimony and to glorify you. And we just pray that as we speak and just hang out with one another today, that we do that very thing, that it is our testimonies of what you're doing in our lives come to glorify you, and our encouragement for those around us, that you are putting people in earshot of this, and really, God, that it's just you moving, and that's what we want to be, is faithful and good servants this morning. So we just ask for that blessing on the podcast and on your children and on your church. In Jesus' name, amen. So like I was saying, Dawn Reeves is back today. Mine last week, if you watched, was a long, I think an hour 40 testimony, and it really was a transition from who I once was to where I am today. And God is not done in that right now. God is not done moving in our lives, in your life. And with a submissive heart, you will allow God to do what God does in your life. So, Dawn Reeves, this morning, let's start with who you once were.
How far back?
Let's go back to however far you want to be. You know, God does amazing things, and you just start where He's moving you to start. And if it changes, we can do episode 12, 13, and 15.
So I was born and raised locally. I would have to say in a small town. And unfortunately, one of my first memories were at the age of 5. My parents liked to drink and party. And at the age of 5 is when I was probably first completely inebriated. I do actually recall that. And, you know, it was normal in our family to, you know, there wasn't many parties without a half barrel or bartenders or whatever. So growing up, I make it sound bad, but it really wasn't bad. It was what we knew. And you know, take it on through high school, I would say, looking back, I knew I was always loved, but certainly didn't feel it. I knew it, but it wasn't transpired. Life was one way till I hit about the age of 10, and then along comes the next generation, and at that point, my dad just almost flipped a switch. It was between the age of 10 and probably the tween years. You know, I start coming into my teen years, and I would say...
And you're a child of how many?
There's
4 of you total.
Yep, and I'm number 2. And when 4 came along, everything changed. And obviously, back then, and not knowing, I call it BC, before Christ, not knowing the truth, knowing it but not knowing it, I actually learned to despise him, the littlest one, because I was the one, my dad would be there. My mom had a back surgery and literally was crawling around. She couldn't walk after she had him. So my dad came to me and woke me up to take care of this baby. And looking back, I have no regrets. At the time, it was rough. It was rough.
How old were your parents at that time? Do you remember?
They had to be in their 30s, early 30s, when, sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. Let me know.
Yeah, that is a hard place to be when, because the parents are getting older, right? And the dynamics really start to change, especially after, raising multiple children. By the time the last couple come rolling around, the dynamic is shifting.
It is shifting, and he was truly, the three of us were really close. It was 68, 70, and 72 were the years, and then 80 comes yet another.
Should we kill it and restart?
No.
Okay.
So at that time, we were excited to have him. And, I just remember, if it's interesting because my sister remembers taking care of him too. So apparently between the two of us, she couldn't. And it's not like she didn't partake of it, my mom. It was just, how do you carry a baby on your knees?
Right.
But then, then comes the teen years. And,
so you weren't raised in church at all, or were you?
Yes, kind of. So we were all baptized Catholic, and we all had godparents. I stepped foot into a Catholic church, I think, twice, and miserably messed up. I couldn't keep up with all that.
Under the age of 10, or?
Probably about that age. My dad took us one time, not sure why, and then I went once with a friend.
Okay.
Which was a little bit embarrassing, but we went to a Lutheran church. So in this Lutheran church, my parents did not go. We either walked or they dropped us off. It was too cold or whatever, they would drop us off and pick us up. And ironically, the only time I was ever in church with my parents was when Matthew was baptized as an infant. I do recall being in church with him then.
What was he baptized?
Well, it was Lutheran. I didn't know any better.
It was Lutheran at the time?
Yeah, it was all Dawn BC, and that's all I knew. And
sure.
Never did get confirmed, never got into the law of the church because honestly, I'm not going to get into details, but they told me that if I didn't go to church, I didn't believe.
So what was your thought process on God at that point? Did you formulate a theory, or?
I knew about him. I knew about him. I would read, certainly didn't live it out, but yet looking back, I can see his presence all the way along. So I just knew there was a God. I didn't not believe. And I did have a pastor that we would go down to the pit stop to air up our bike tires. And he would have this massive cigar hanging out of his mouth and talking smack. And I remember, I can't tell you how young I was, but I was crouched down, airing up my bike tires thinking, this guy's a hypocrite. And, not like I came from a good place because, where we came from, there was a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, a lot of anger. And, like Bill Cosby says, I thought my name was GD or JC, I mean, that's kind of how we grew up. So it didn't, I remember thinking, that's not what he says in the pulpit at all. Like, so who is this guy?
You knew of God, but you didn't know
God. Yes. And I did have an experience at the age of 13 when my grandmother died. There was, today I'd dub it as the Holy Spirit. It's a rough age anyways. And when you feel like you lose one of the very few people that care about you, I remember just feeling the comfort and not exactly knowing what it was, but just knowing there was a comfort there. So, growing up, I would say, I didn't know that things weren't right. I didn't know that, we had experienced, well, I'll tell my part. We were sexually abused as kids, and it went on for a period of years. Not by my family, not by any family members. But that takes a toll. That was hard. It was hard because being so young, it was from second to fifth grade for me. So being so young, I didn't understand it. Right. I didn't understand it. It didn't come from within my home, where that would have totally probably pushed us over the edge. But it just didn't make sense to me. And I remember getting in trouble at school because they're like, "Will you sit up? Will you?" I was just so tired. My parents both work. A lot of times they work second and third shift. Up until I was the whistleblower, but up until that point, so we would go spend the night at a friend's house, and so then there was total access because both my parents were working at the time, second and third shift. They were security at a factory, so we used to sleep on the floor, and then when they went into work, they would drop us off. So, but and just that, and it didn't last. I don't think it was for. I mean, it was clearly they were in third shift that the whole 4 years or whatever that was, but then the night I blew the whistle, I seen something that I didn't expect. As a kid, well, Scripture says you as a child you think like a child, you act like a child, and so when I blurted it out, I knew what was coming that night because the wife, we got word that she was giving birth to the second child, and I knew exactly what we were in for, so I just blurted it out, and I had a big mouth then, like maybe towards the negative side in a way, and it's not like I went and cursed people out or anything, but if I was thinking it, people around me knew it. So I've been told, and still am told. So, but at that point, I remember thinking, and when I said it, it shocked me. And my mom actually took the vehicle on 2 wheels, and it was right at the truck stop right there at Peterbilt, and I'll never forget it. She took it on 2 wheels, took us home, and that was the only time I recall my dad ever leaving work. He had 2 heart attacks. They called him a cab, but that night he left work, and what unfolded from there was a sleepless night.
Did you feel like your family rallied around you at that point, or did you feel isolated?
Did not rally around. My mom was a train wreck, and I can only imagine how she was feeling.
Oh, that's got to be devastating all the way around.
And I knew when my dad walked through that door, something was going to happen. There was a lot of yelling. My room was where you could hear it, and I could just hear the yelling and screaming for a long time. Not anger. Well, my dad was very angry at my mother because it was her friend's husband, and he didn't like her friend. So there was that kind of anger. But that night, I used to work on cars with my dad. Pre-Chris. So for the first 10 years, I was under the cars with him doing whatever. And that night I heard him say, that's it, I'm calling in my favor. And I had told this story once before where we did work for someone who he wouldn't take pay from. And my mom just kind of went off the deep end as far as, you're not doing that. And this favor meant problem solved. And looking back at it as an adult, that is, I can honestly say that's the right reaction. Somebody hurts your child, somebody that you love and try to protect, instinct kicks in. And I didn't know until that night what the guy, I was standing there when the guy came to get his bug. We had put a transmission in his VW bug, and when my dad wouldn't take money, he's like, okay, Dickie, he said, that's fine, I owe you one. As a kid, I didn't think anything about it. But that night I understood exactly what that favor was. And I never said anything for decades. I didn't say a word.
Now, one of the struggles as a parent is, how do we operate in the spirit when our initial response is almost always in the flesh, especially when it comes to protecting children.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are the weakest among us, and that is hard. You know, one of my prayers is always that God,
Thank you, sir.
that I have enough wisdom to allow God to protect Eric and not me, because something happens to him. I always say my flesh response would, I would slaughter cities, you know, and that's, I don't want to be there. I
Right.
really want to be in a position where I'm so submissive to the authority of God that.
Well, and that's really where you have to be. So,
Boy, is that hard, though.
you know, I understood so much. So carrying on through the teen years, as I grew up, I can look back and I don't blame my parents for anything. I really don't. You know, I was their greatest challenge. I'm positive of that, and you know, they're not really able to tell you that today. But through my teen years, then there was Chris that pulled me away. My dad and I used to go sit at the bar and drink. And, you know, if we were at home drinking, which the bar was kitty corner, so it was literally, you know, you couldn't spit on it, but it was close. And if the bar was closed, we'd sit outside, have a beer, put a little salt in our beer, and eat a can of green beans. So we had a relationship before the baby came along. Then the baby came along and everything changed. And it wasn't necessarily bad. But then the teen years creep in. Go ahead.
Well, it just struck me a little funny when you said that. So the one thing that's hindering, or in your brain hindering your relationship with your dad at that point, also pulled you out of the bar.
It did.
It did, didn't it?
It did. Yeah, it did.
That's funny.
Yeah. So that's probably about the time. So our house, one of us lit the house on fire, not on purpose, but it was a light in a cardboard birdhouse that started our house on fire. And my dad I was 7 when this happened. And they kept saying, Dickie, your house is on fire. He's like, yeah, whatever. He thought they were messing with him. Well, by the time he actually believed them, it was ablaze, and it didn't.
The house was on fire.
Yeah, it did, and it was an old general store, and it didn't burn the house down, but it damaged the room. And I remember my parents were angry because, and I took the blame for that. And so there were situations like that throughout the years. I was their cleaning crew. And so when I was cleaning up, I remember looking at these birthday candles thinking, what do I do? So I stuck them back on the cake, which allowed my younger brother to grab them and get a light. See, a bird wouldn't move into this birdhouse he built in his bedroom. And so he figured it needed a light. And when he did, you know, I mean, the logic is there. But yeah, so then we ended up building and moving to another small community. And when we did that, I was, again, still 7 years old. And we went from an old general store to a brand new house. And then the youngest came along. And from that point, there was a distance. And it's just life. Looking back, I see it's just life. It's not like he hated me, but after my grandmother died when I was 13 is when I really became angry. You know, I was actually cheated, and unfortunately, my personality is record keeper, so I don't always forget things that I should. And Tammy got her, she got to go up and spend her 2 weeks with grandma, but I didn't. Oh no, and looking back, I would believe it was because I was there to help all the time, and they didn't want to lose 2 weeks of their help. And as a parent, yes, that's selfish, but again, I don't fault them for it. So anyways, I was angry. So when grandma died, that's it. You know, there was no way I was ever going to get my 2 weeks. And so somewhere during that time, and I was 13, you know, and then I started coming into my own, and I was mad, and I was angry, and came to the point where Actually, there was 3 suicide attempts, and by the 3rd time I thought I had it mastered. I was positive I had it mastered, and woke up 3 days later, madder than I was when I did what I did. And and my parents actually walked through it like they were very cautious.
Was it all pills, or how were the 3 attempts?
It was all drug, yeah, and it was prescription painkillers. My mom had a ton of them on hand, and she didn't really take them, and she didn't even know they were gone. You know, so the 3rd time was an entire bottle of Percocet, and it.
Was it intentional? Was the thought, I am going to kill myself?
Yeah, absolutely. Between everything that went on, between the distance from my dad, which I am seeing, working with girls today, fathers are critical, absolutely critical. Even if they're not perfect, even if they're flawed, their daughters need them like I didn't realize. So, during that time, my dad and I agreed on one thing, and that was that he hated me and I hated him, and he was not afraid to say it. And from that point, there were several years, probably 7 years-ish, where I was his target. And provocation was a very real thing. He would say things to me like, no, he would, and my mom and dad would get mad and say things that were just so not right, just.
Did you ever receive counseling for the sexual abuse?
No. So that was, the way that unfolded is it didn't go to trial because we were terrified. So they did a deferred prosecution. So we were in the judge's chambers talking to detectives. They took all the statements, and I don't recall. We were all young enough that I just don't recall everything that went down. I did try to find the records. I checked around. I checked the county, the city, the town, and the village. And
so how did you deal with it? Did you? I mean, just it happened. I'm gonna suck it up, and I'm just gonna stuff it down in my brain.
That was half the anger. That was actually half the anger, because I couldn't wrap my mind around it, and yet so coming into your teen years, I was ashamed, like I had done something wrong, and so through that process, there was good that came out of it, because if from a very young age I could tell in someone else, and actually by the time I would say late 80s, early 90s, different coworkers, different people that I had run across, I started to realize that this shameful thing was not a rare occasion.
Right.
But I was finding very few people who didn't, and it wasn't like I brought it up. It was almost like people were bringing things up and pulling information out of me that I didn't want them to pull out. Right down to I was at work one day in 91 or 2, and people mixed this girl by the name of Annie and I up. They couldn't tell us apart from behind. And I'd walked onto her ward and was saying something or other, and she was telling me of this story where she went to purchase a car. And she told me the whole story, and she said at the end, this guy is like, yeah, I could have really screwed you. And I'm like, oh, well, where'd you get the car? And she named the dealership, and it's a local dealership, and she gave his name. Well, here, you want his card? And there was 3 women on that ward that day that said, what is wrong? So my face said something that I didn't realize, but I knew that he was still out there creating this path of destruction, and it didn't matter who it was. Right up until, the last one I heard about was like probably 7 years ago that I've personally heard about. So I took that upon myself as a shameful thing, and the family didn't speak about it. What was tormenting after the fact, in my particular case, is because my mother was friends with this woman, she the guy fled the state to avoid capture and jail. And we had to kind of raise her kids from that point. And there were several years, and it was a no good situation.
Right.
Those children didn't deserve our anger towards them because of who they came from. And all of us, the three older ones, were just angry at them. And I remember thinking, looking back,
Eric, can I get some Kleenex? It's a tough spot to be in because there is nothing good that comes of that. You know, their family's hurt, your family's hurt, and you wind up with a whole lot of children that are empty and wounded and angry.
My family came out okay. It's brought wisdom. It's brought a lot of things. Their family, not so much. And he was married before, so there was 2 previous children and 2 latter children. Actually, he was married 3 times, and then there was a 5th one. That's just what I know of. But my regret is, looking back, I feel for those kids because it wasn't them.
Right.
But they represented, and because of the deferred prosecution, thank you, sir, appreciate it. Because of the deferred prosecution, the single mom couldn't pay, so we were sitting on his couch, and she paid my parents in furniture or just whatever she could, and it was a no good, ugly situation all the way around.
Right.
But as a kid, you can't process that. Nobody could. None of us could. And looking back, my heart goes out to them. Were we treated wrong? Yep. But we still had our family. We still had that backing. So it was an awkward, odd situation. So when it was over, it really wasn't over. It was kind of just beginning. Because now
Right.
it was out in the open. And then we have these 2 little beings, which were good kids. They're day and night. And they went home about 1 day a week for, I don't even know how long. It was probably in the next 2 to 3 years.
Mm.
And so by the time I hit my teen years, I was ready for a fight. And it didn't matter who or what. I think it just, all that pent up came out in all kinds of, hostile ways. Between that situation between my dad and my mom had a daycare. So this in-home daycare, I could hear her from my bedroom telling this parent. And I thought, oh God, here we go. And telling that parent. And it was like every parent that came in the door, whatever surfaced that day about that, we had to hear it again and again and again. And it was this, she didn't realize what she was doing. I believe if she knew, she wouldn't have kept repeating it. But to her, it was happening to her too.
Right.
And she couldn't process it. And yet all these people were coming into our home, so she could let it out little bits at a time. But it was just salt in the wound.
I assume it doesn't help that it's in such a small town, because everybody knows everybody else. It's like it's almost like running a church in Stoughton when you're an alcoholic and drug addict, and
right.
Everybody knows what you're doing, what you've been through, and where you're going, and it can be embarrassing, it can be stressful,
It can be, but don't forget that when I was inquiring of the Lord that, what could be greater than casting out demons, raising the dead, and healing the sick? He showed me you preaching in your own hometown. Jesus couldn't do that.
Now, speaking of Jesus and what he's doing in your life, let's not jump ahead real quick here, because I'm interested in a couple things. Anger. I don't know what anger looks like from a female perspective. I can tell you I was an angry kid. I was angry from the time I was 14 until 30, and but that's almost second nature to a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Women, on the other hand, how do they deal with anger? I'm assuming if you are an angry woman, you don't have a lot of women friends then.
Mm-mm. No, I had a couple in high school, but I can chew them up and spit them out. Women are way more cruel than men. You just pop somebody in the face with your fist and it's over.
And you could be friends that afternoon.
And women, not so much. And I did have a best friend in high school, and I occasionally talk to her. It's very rare, but she actually was kind of my saving grace. She doesn't know it, but so being so angry, you drive people away.
Right.
I was very good at it, and I liked it. Not in the sense that I liked hurting people, but in the sense that I didn't want to be bothered by them. And guys were easy as far as, and no, I didn't go sleeping around with them all the time, but they were my friends, you know. And we used to just have fun. And,
can I ask you a question about
yes.
that? Promiscuity sometimes goes hand in hand because they don't have an ability to adjust to what should be healthy sexually or healthy relationally. What kept you out of that kind of promiscuity?
Mostly because I think they were scared of me.
So your anger?
Yeah, I think so.
Isn't that
because
interesting?
I would sit there and be like, "What's wrong with me?" You know, and they would get just close enough, and I don't know if I let them see too much or what, but eventually I did start dating. Actually, not until I was out of high school. I graduated at 17, and that's when I started dating. And from there, then she tanked. I tipped.
Still drinking?
Well, I kind of, from the time I quit going to the bar with my dad, I was still their bartender at parties. I still made all their drinks and had to sample them, so I made sure they were just
right.
Yes, and our house was perfectly set up. So once I got my license, and I'm pretty sure I got it on my birthday. I'd have to go back and look, but that was my freedom. So I thought. So out of that settlement, the agreement was my dad would get us each a car. And he showed up with this 1975 Ford Granada that was ugly as sin. It was awful. And when I looked out my bedroom window, I thought, "Dear Jesus, I'm not driving that thing." And so he proceeded to do body work on this car, which made it more humiliating. Now it was a white car with green putty and brown putty. He couldn't even match putty. And I thought, and that car didn't last long, and I was okay. I was okay with that. So I bumped the back of a van and put like a $50 size dimple in it, knocked somebody on the floor, and all was well. Put another front end on it, a bumper on it, headlights, and that one made it a few more months. So it was my junior year of high school when I got mono and was down for the count. And the day I went in for my last mono checkup, I was hit by, they put drunk driver with a question mark. He was under the influence of something to the point where he couldn't get between the cars. He locked my car in. Anyways, he broadsided me, and that was a situation where I didn't know at the time that God was there when he was really there. So apparently I was pretty influential with my friends or whatever, and I had asked 3 or 4 people to go with me to the docks, and all their moms said no. And I'm like, this is weird because, maybe because I was an instigator, I don't know. But nobody could go that day, so I went, and that's when I was T-boned, and back then you didn't wear seatbelts, so I was knocked out, and on the other side of the car when I came to, and I couldn't get out of my car, so I remember crawling back in the driver's seat thinking, what am I going to do? I'm like, Jesus, what do I do? And saying it without knowing any profound effect. And all of a sudden, this guy, completely dressed in brown, don't know what that means, but he completely walked up and got my rear door open. And I was like, okay. And as I'm telling the police officer this, what I had seen, how I got out of the car and stuff, he was asking all these questions. I told him that, and I can see the woman, so I was locked to a brand new BMW. I mean, it was a hard hit. Dude said he was going 25, but he took my front clip from the firewall up. The whole engine compartment went over 12 inches. So it wasn't, aka the reason I was knocked out. But anyways, I didn't realize until years later that that was an angel, because as I'm telling the cop this story, the woman whose car the guy tried to beat me up, so she locked me in her car, and I can see her shaking her head no, like there was no guy that walked up. Well, I didn't know, I didn't have that relationship, and I didn't know. But looking back, I can see these points where he was there, and I didn't know it. So, but that's how I got out of my car that day. It was smashed enough that I couldn't, the doors, and I was kicking them, and I could not get out. So I thought that was kind of unique. That door was wide open when I went to the junkyard to get my stuff out of it. That door was still open.
So at what point what led you right to the fact that God is there, God is moving, and that Jesus wants a relationship with you?
So, well, for me, people tell me I have a strong personality and I'm stubborn. I could argue that point, but so I can jump ahead to that, or I can take you how I got to that point.
So would you consider where you're at now still a progression of a downhill slide then?
Where I'm at right now? No.
No, where you were there.
I didn't, that was still BC.
So what was your bottom? I guess just continue on with what gets you there.
So I ended up graduating high school. My mom finished my English because I had an English teacher. If I mention her name, where I'm from would be obvious, but she drove me crazy. I'm a realist. When I watch a movie, it's got to be based on truth. It's just, don't give me this fake. I don't like Marvel. It's not real. Okay, so on that note, this teacher, I came in. We had 4 minutes to get from class, and I came in as the bell rang. That's not late in my book, And so I came in and I sat down, and she's like, "Were you late? Did the bandits get you in the hall, tie you up, and throw you in your locker?" And I'm like, "No, I went to the bathroom and I came in." So anyway, she gave me 2 weeks detention, and I didn't serve detentions for anybody, but this lady was, I called her off her rocker, but she was probably just creative, and other people loved her. I didn't. So I had served, I can't say all of them, but I had served these detentions, and either my car was probably down because my mom was coming to pick me up, and this lady flunked me for not showing up to these detentions. And so I just kind of derailed, and my vice principal had his arm around me, walking me down the hall as I'm saying things I shouldn't say loudly because I was livid, and telling me, "Shh, Dawn," inside voice, just inside voice. And I'm like, she's bat crazy. I can't. So looking back, I did not finish English. I said no. She's off her rocker. Plus, English was the same from 6th grade to 12th grade. It didn't change. I wasn't learning anything. So I actually cried when I got my diploma signed because it wasn't supposed to be. My mom did the class from the UW to technically make me graduate because I refused. So after high school, then that's when I started dating, and it wasn't intentional, but you could get alcohol anywhere. You could get whatever you wanted without even looking. And being a girl, I'd walk into a bar and I didn't have to pay for it. And so you're smiling because it's true.
It is true, because I remember in high school, I dated a girl who looked much older, and she would just go in and pick us up booze. And
yeah,
if it's a guy bartender, you're just in anyway. So
you are, and it was kind of sad because I remember people saying, "Can I buy you a drink?" And I'm like, "No, I'm here with my friends," and I didn't want to be rude. Even being angry, I really didn't want to be rude. I was, but it wasn't like I purposely set out to be. And so, like, this one guy, he's like, "No, that's okay," and I'm like, "No, save your money." I'm thinking, save it for somebody who will sit and talk to you, because I didn't, I just didn't want to be rude. But so I went. where was I going with this? So I graduated high school. I started dating this guy, and I stopped eating, and that was not intentional. I didn't plan it. It just, and whenever, even to this day, I can drink instead of eat. I'm good with, it must fill my belly enough. But so I went through the summer, doing things we shouldn't be doing, and going to parties, just living for me. Actually, really, is really what it was. And I remember Christmas Eve came around, and my family always did Christmas Eve, most everything on Christmas Eve, and then they just kept, even after we all grew up and knew, they just would, Santa would come, and then you'd have a gift Christmas morning. So that Christmas Eve, not that the world needs to know this, but I just knew at that point that I was pregnant, and and because of an incident when I was 5, I should not. There was a good chance I shouldn't have had kids, a really good chance, and there is evidence of that injury that, of course, I can't see, but I've been told of. So, so I thought I had a free ride through life, and wasn't the case. So that day, it instantly changed. It was an instant change. It was no longer me. It was no longer. I almost went into a mode of action, just and it took a while to be able to eat again. And I remember I'd eat and it'd come up, and I'd eat and it'd come up, and it just took a while to be able to eat. And I was terrified because of my choices between the drugs, the alcohol, and no sleep, and living on the edge.
So you're pregnant?
Yes. So
at what age?
Christmas Eve, 18.
18 going on 19.
Yeah, because I graduated when I was 17. So it was that summer I turned 18. And then by Christmas is when I realized I was pregnant. And so everything changed, and everything changed overnight. I was actually working I don't even know what they call it, like a temp job at the time. And and that was coming to an end, and all of a sudden I had to eat crow and go back home, and a lot of things I didn't want to do, I had to do. And it wasn't but it wasn't necessarily a burden. I did not want to go back home. I did not. But it was a safe place. And
Right.
so because it wasn't just me, I did. And I thought for sure, my dad was going to throw me up against the wall one last time. And he didn't. He didn't do it.
What was his response?
I'm positive he was disappointed, but it almost went back to this, it was almost when the hatred ended. Like he realized that I was no longer challenging him. I was no longer his greatest regret. The look in his eyes was just that often. I was the target of, he would be either a happy drunk or a mean drunk, one or the other. And when it turned mean, I was his target. And actually I expected that. Like I braced myself for the blow, and it never came. It never came, and I found myself, I needed a crib at one point, and he went out and bought a crib and put it together and put it in my bedroom. I had to go back to my old bedroom, so that was a whole lot of, overcoming right there. Not just moving back home, but going back. And my siblings were actually, they were kind about it. They didn't say, there was none of this cutting anything. And my mom was excited, which was terrifying. She was super excited. And I was just like, no, did you hear me? Did you hear what I said? And she was very excited. She was just like, okay, well, we need to, and she went into action. So fast forward, and
hold on, outside, just out of curiosity, so outside of expecting your dad to hit you one more time,
yeah,
what did you think your mom would do?
I didn't know. She loved kids. That's all she could talk about. She had 30 some kids in her home growing up. She was a licensed daycare, and so I expected as a parent the disappointment. The really, are you serious? you know, and I got none of that.
Was it a relief?
The relief came when I didn't end up against the wall and on the floor. That because I just expected it. I just absolutely expected it, and not that I would have deserved it that time, but most other times I did. You know, I did something too, but I was just as mad as he was, and I challenged him. So, is it ever right? No, and I did end up with. I left home with 3 concussions, and one of them was not the car wreck. It was just I challenged him, and he's a lot bigger than I was.
And when you got home and said, "This is what's happening," you were welcomed back.
I was. Yeah, I think my mom actually asked me to move back. So, yeah, so I went home and I had him, and my mom was not very calm about the process because back then I liked the movie Cosby Show, but it was before I knew what kind of a person he was. It was just a good family show back then, coming from where I was, BC. Now today I can watch it, but my water had broke, and for the first time ever, I was like, thought I wet the bed, and I got up and jumped in the shower, not realizing, nobody tells you anything, it's your first rodeo, and um, I wanted to watch the Cosbys before I went in, and my mom actually called my dad at work, who in turn called me and tried to coax me, and I'm like, Dad, 5 minutes left, I'll go when the Cosby Show is over. But it was back to that relationship again with him, and it wasn't that I disrespected him. It was that I was angry during that time, and so because he hated me, so it was ironic. Fast forward to when my parents divorced, actually on my 25th birthday. I actually reached out to him because he had left, and it was truly a situation of a woman tearing down her own home. It really was. My dad didn't like this best friend whose husband hurt us, and she kept coming around, and he asked my mom to just stop. And he'd go to work, and she'd come over, and she was sowing discord. And that is really what destroyed their marriage. Later on, they both verbalized, actually within 30 days of one another to me, their great regret in doing so.
It's amazing how adamant Scripture is about those that sow discord.
Yeah. Yep. And my parents' marriage was not the only one she broke up, by far. And so my dad was at the point where, and I can see both sides of it, the little bit I do know about it. In a marriage, there's no way anybody knows what goes on between two people. I mean, you can hear bits and pieces, but you really don't know.
Right.
When two become one flesh, it is a powerful, profound thing that that people just don't know the details and the depths. So anyway, so my dad left, and he was homeless when he left school. Not school. When he got out of the military, he was homeless. So he was actually sleeping in his truck, and he didn't like it, but it didn't faze him. And he was waiting for an efficiency to open up. And when I found that out, I called him. I'm like, Dad, just come grab my couch. I don't have an extra room, but take my couch. And he's like, you'd do that for me? And I thought, isn't that interesting? But see, he, not that it was all on him by any means, but he started to rebuild that relationship.
Mm.
But I would do that for anybody, and it caused. I took it on the chin because then she thought I was siding with him, and I'm like, Mom, if you were homeless, I would give you a place to sleep and food to eat. So it wasn't long before he found an efficiency and carried on. But
so you're pregnant at this point.
Yep.
I'm assuming you have not just ran off and found yourself a church quite yet and jumped into God.
Not at all. Wasn't even thinking about it.
But you were sobering up.
Pretty much overnight.
Mm-hmm. And that's on the heels of essentially 3 suicide attempts, and what could be just described as a really rough season.
Yeah.
So when you and I'm not looking back. We all can look back and say, "Yep, that's God moving in this area." It was just life at that point.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that happens. This is what kids do. This is what adults sometimes struggle with up into their 40s, or further, right? That we almost just live reactionary, right? So now we've got to worry about getting our feet underneath us, getting stuff moving so that we can have a baby. I assume your head's just in, what are we going to do for the next day? What are we going to do for the next year? How are we going to get by?
My MO was literally one step at a time.
Right.
And it was looking ahead, but I can't even explain why I cared. But this overnight instinct kicked in where I realized it wasn't just me, and I had to do everything I could in my power to right the wrong. And by that, trying to eat and trying to, and when he was born, I expected that there'd be something wrong. There was no way in the world that he should have been okay. And not only was he okay and perfect, but looking ahead all these years, he's been a true blessing, and he's successful, and he's, there's so many great things that I think, I would have never not chose life. I would have never not. And not that I made a deliberate, I just never considered adoption or abortion. It just never, I just thought, oh my, now I got this,
There is something about just the value of life that you can't deny. That you, even if you are not rooted in Jesus or a relationship in any fashion, life is just that important. I mean, it just is. And when you diminish it in any fashion, you diminish all life. And that is the struggle. Is today we are experiencing a culture where death is actually more important than life. We're in a culture that just glorifies it. Mass shooters, suicide attempts, whatever it takes to get famous online. And if it's death, we're good with that. It's a 360 or a 180 of where we used to be. But you even have this. You know this is important. So much so. And I don't mean to take this a different direction, but I remember I had done so many drugs as a youth that I thought, you know what, I'm sterile. I'm never going to have a child. And when Rebecca was pregnant, I remember the relief when I got to hold him and count 5 on each foot and each hand, and his eyes are in the right spot. I didn't give
God.
But God.
And that's all you can. That's and no one can take that from you. Why? They're so perfect. And I had planned on a Michaela Nicole, and that was, it was going to be her and I against the world. And I don't know at what point I decided that, but they didn't do ultrasounds, even though they thought I was having twins right up until month 8. Talk about adding terror to terror. It was just, and he was only an 8-pounder. But when that baby was born, my mom, I did allow her to come in, and I was very much, didn't want anybody in there. I didn't want any more shame built on. I just didn't. I've never been the kind of bear all that way. And so it was hard for me, but she was respectful. She stayed by my head. And I heard her say, "Oh, Dawn, it's a boy." And I'm like, "Give him to me." It didn't matter.
I'm going to ask you a question somebody asked me once, and it caught me off guard. Because I always, I exaggerate the relief I had when Eric was so-called normal.
Yeah, I felt the same.
But the question posed to me was, what if he wasn't?
It wouldn't have mattered.
And that's my response to instantaneously.
It wouldn't have mattered, you know.
Children are such an enormous gift from God.
I think about Reverend for Devin, you know, that boy, someone seen value in his life. And one of my positions was out at the colony, and when we were out at the colony, I can look back over my life actually and see God's hand in it so incredibly. So here I am. I had just turned 19 by the time he was born. And I stayed home for 2 months, and then I knew I had to get on with, it was me. I had to provide for him. And so I went back to work, and I was managing a Burger King at the time, and went through that. And a friend of mine that I had met at that actual job was like, "Oh, just come take this stick test with me." And I'm like, I really don't want to. And she's like, no, I just want company taking this test. And long and short of it is this test was for the colony. And even though they were desperately hurting for people, there was still a process you had to go through. I got the job. She didn't. When it came to the interview, I'm like, I am not doing this. I vowed when I was 5 years old that I would never step foot in that place again. My mother worked there. I don't know if you know that.
I did not know that.
My mother worked there, and my memories of that place were terrifying. That's one, where she met Gail. Two, I was there when I was a kindergartner, and this really tall, well, we use the term retarded. They use developmentally disabled. Actually, your wife said it's another one now. But their minds were not normal, if you will. And this guy walks up and he sits on me and squishes me. And I thought, if I survive this and get out of here, I'm never coming back. Well, then we ended up going back when they went on strike, and they were shipping the kids all over the state to clean house, if you will. That was my opinion of it. They were shipping these kids all over. My dad was trying to hold the vans back, and he was actually doing it. And I remember sitting in our truck or whatever we had at the time, thinking, "Don't run my dad over," because he was literally, the vans were pushing the line of people to get the kids out, and they were forcing. And my mom was stuck in there. She was in there around the clock. She couldn't come home. She couldn't get past the line. It was a violent, if you will, strike, is what it was. And so, ending up there, that was probably my first revelation of never say never. Don't say
Right.
you're never. My goals when I left home were to never get married. If what my parents had was a marriage, and ironically, they had good times. Like, especially my dad would get laid off from Oscars every year. And they would have a blast. They'd sit and play games. They'd get along. They had fun. But then life happened, and like I said, when he was drinking, he liked to drink on the weekends, and he was either happy or mean, just mean. And but yeah. So, anyways, I was getting somewhere with this story. Just totally lost my train of thought. But anyways, so yeah.
We were actually, the reason I had brought that up is because we were talking about the value of life.
So I got the job. Lene did not. I was mad. And then I found myself showing up for 6 weeks of training, and I thought, this is so not for me. What am I doing? But it wasn't long, and before I had the second to the worst ward of kids, but I loved it. They were physical. They were, I have a scar on my arm I ended up being taken out of work because of that job. I was injured to the point where they did a medical separation, but I've had chunks taken out of my arm. I've had, been strangled almost twice, but it didn't bother me. But I could see, so even though they couldn't talk as we're verbalizing, most of them could not, they communicated very well. It's amazing when you look into someone's eyes what they're saying. And from that, I took away many gifts. One, it doesn't matter what your body or brain do. there's value. The ones that couldn't speak, you could tell when they were in pain. You could tell when they were cold. You can tell. Well, I can't speak for others, but you could tell, and there was still value in their life. I remember being upset because when I was injured, this person could talk and comprehend, but they actually told this kid that he's the reason I wasn't coming back, and I thought that was mean and cruel.
That's horrible.
And so I'm sure he's not with us because what he had didn't have a long life expectancy. But why would you put that on somebody? And I always call them my kids because mentally most of them were that way. You could carry on some conversations, but they were shallow. They just didn't have the mental capabilities, the reason they were institutionalized. And some of them had such health issues that they were round the clock care.
I am amazed, and I don't want to shift the topic, but because life is the issue. I mean, that is the topic in all of this, is that those kids bring a joy about them that most of us don't even understand.
No, I would agree with that.
And it's absolutely amazing how adults that we would consider normal or productive don't seem or realize the value of each and every individual life, including just children in general.
Well, and it's not even like some of those people were older than me, but yet I called them my kids. And I remember in that particular position, there was a nurse who did not like me, and I don't blame her. It was Dawn BC. I had a mouth until she seen my work. So a friend of mine convinced me I should go to nights. I'm like, Jack, how am I going to sleep with a little guy? And he's like, oh, just take my night shift. So I went to nights for a few months, and in that process, she seen that I valued them, who they were. She came in, they were clean, they were dressed, they were not nasty. Their laundry, you have extra time at night, so I'd clean out their closets and I'd organize the ward. And what else are you going to do at night to stay awake,
Sure.
And even though we had our, we would play cards and stuff like that too, at certain hours, all of a sudden one day she started talking to me in a respectful tone, and I was just like, what's wrong with you? And she didn't say anything other than she didn't per se apologize, but she's like, you really care about these people. And I'm thinking, so what, and that brought me to the place where don't discount or discredit who a person is by what you see on the outside. And I can actually say this about myself, but one of my kids I refer to did, not so much anymore, but a crustacean. Because, I think of a lobster. They're all hard and crusty on the outside. You actually have to use a tool to break into the tender meat, and so on the outside, people can appear hard. We don't know where they walked, what storm they walked through, what brought them to this place. But look upon the matters of the heart, and you see a totally different side of people. And so all these positions that I've held, more recently I've discovered that you're not there by error. You're not there by mistake. There's something you're either there for or to receive. And, always look for the what can I do? What can I do? And in the process, usually hindsight, I see what I receive. And I don't go forward expecting to receive. I go forward expecting to be of help wherever I can. So I ended up leaving, and actually about that time, I was already injured when I met Doug. Doug comes along in '93, and as shallow as that was as well, my friend, and this was the Lord's work at hand. Cheryl and I had just moved into a duplex, and she was my best friend, and I trusted that my child would be safe in that home with her present. Not just a roommate, is what I'm saying. And we got the house put together. My Monte Carlo went down, and And she's like, Dawn, just come out with us. And I'm like, no, to cruise East Wash. And I just didn't want to. If I wasn't driving, I had no interest in East Wash whatsoever. So my dad called never before.
Which, for those of you who don't know, was a very popular cruising place for us old people. So
yeah, apparently it's Janesville now. But yeah, some people would cruise. I would go for the race. But so anyways, my dad called me that Friday and said, hey, can we have Matthew? Mom and I are going camping. We'd like to take him. And I'm like, wait, what? And my dad actually called. He never before, never since then has ever asked for any one of my kids. And I'm like, well, okay. So here I am sitting in this house. I got it all unpacked and put together. And, my friend kept saying this. And I said, I won't go unless you promise me that you'll bring me home when I ask. And she said, fine. So we get up, make one round around the Capitol. And I'm like, take me home. Take me, just take me home.
Are you sober at this point?
I am very sober.
So you didn't just stay sober for the pregnancy.
I stayed sober.
You stayed sober.
Mm-hmm. And not that I didn't occasionally drink, but I wasn't a drunk anymore. I didn't purposely drink and drive to see if I could stay between the lines. None of that. All that was behind me.
So the drugs were behind you, the alcohol?
Yep.
So are you responsible?
I would say so, yeah. Because Cheryl was like, are you ever going to go out again? And Matthew was over a year old before she finally convinced me to go out again.
Can I ask you a question before we go on? So you've got a baby.
Yep.
And I know this is life, and this is just the stuff that happens. And I'm pretty sure nobody in the entire world says, well, at least not generally speaking, I want to be a teenage mom and hopefully single, and I get to do this by myself. It's just something that happens, and we wind up doing it. Did you have a take? Are you, at this point, examining your life and saying, you know what, this is okay, or this is what I want to do? Or are you still day by day, let's get through this?
It was still definitely Dawn BC. Day by day, nobody was allowed to watch my child. My mother,
you're a protective parent? Very
much so, to the point where I would allow Cheryl, like, she would ask, do you mind? And I'm like, grilling her, and I knew her. And so my mom having the daycare, I would not have probably gone back to work. I don't know what I would have done had I not had someone I trusted to watch him when I could not be there. So I didn't go out after work anymore. There was no, when I did hit second shift, I did go out a few times, but he was already in bed, and I usually picked him up at 11:30 at night when I did get off. But if there was a good enough reason to go, I would call and ask if she could keep him till morning. Mm. And she would do that. So, but I didn't go back to where I was. So this night on East Wash, then I seen this gorgeous black cherry, white soft top. It was a convertible 1968 or 9 Camaro. And as shallow as I was, I'm like, catch them. Either they have money, or they're older, because no teenager drives a car like that. Like somebody. So I knew certain things. I wasn't gonna waste my time, and I didn't really date because I kept hearing this little voice. Oh, this is my mommy's new boyfriend. As shallow as that seems, I wasn't gonna do that to him. So when the rare occasion I did actually meet someone, they knew about him, but they weren't allowed to come anywhere near him. They didn't meet him. And that night, this guy sticks his head out of the window. There was 4 of us in a Jeep. He sticks his head out the window and he's like, you guys want to go to a party? Well, 2 of us are like, yes. And I was one of them. And 2 of them stayed in the Jeep cruising East Wash. So a girl who actually worked for my mom and I went to this party, and I ended up talking to this guy all night long. And, when the party was over, we sat outside and talked, and I went on home because the party was really close to my house. So, and I didn't have to worry about being home or being up because my parents had Matthew at, they were camping. And so this guy actually asked for my number, and I'm like, oh, and he tried calling, and I didn't call him back for days. I just thought life's too short. I enjoyed our conversation. He seemed like he was way more mature than the monkeys around the barrel, if you will. Same old thing every weekend kind of thing, thinking that's not my scene. There was a day when I would have been the monkey at the barrel holding the tap, but not anymore. And so eventually he actually found my roommate who's seen her Jeep. And he stopped and he's like, does she not like me? She's not calling me back. And I thought, well, is this some kind of a creep? Who is this guy? And so so eventually I did call him back, and he could communicate, and not on a shallow level. There was meat. There wasn't some little boy that was just looking for the next great thing. You know what I'm saying? He was just there. He was real. And so we got talking, and my dryer was down.
And just for reference, this is Doug.
This is Doug.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Doug. Yeah. So from there, he didn't show up to my house without a toolbox or something. I was not used to that. I always took care of things. And if I really struggled, I'd call my dad in. But
was he a born again believer?
I've never gotten a straight answer out of him. By all of his actions, his words, everything, yes. Because I had gone back to smoking after, I don't know, Matt was a year and a half old. Don't know why, don't even know how. But he kind of smoked, but he never held a cigarette. You can tell the difference between someone who smokes and someone who just is trying to look like they smoke. And one day I said to him, I'm like, you're not a real smoker, just put them things down, and he did. I was like, what? So it took me a little bit longer, but I did walk away from him. But yeah, so anyways, he would come in, and my dryer was down, and he showed up with a toolbox, and and I'm like, what? You're gonna fix my dryer? And he did, and he hasn't stopped. 30 years out, and the man, you won't find him without tools. If he's without tools, it is a rare thing. But yeah, and the story still goes on with him. So I met him, and we dated for many months before he asked me if he was ever going to be able to meet my son. And he did right before he turned 4. He was at his birthday party, and it was a public place, so I was, and he took to him. And he has been the only father he's ever known, and a good one. And I think that if I could look back, and even though I didn't know what I was doing, it was once told to me that a guy will get away with whatever they can. I didn't know I was holding a line and a standard. I knew what I wasn't going to put up with. I wasn't going to let someone knock my kid out. And just for reference, my mom wasn't around when my dad came after me. She said she had no knowledge of it, and which got me. I'm like, really, how did that happen? And it got me to thinking, I don't think she ever was around. So where she was at the time, I don't know. But so, anyways, Doug and I got married 5 years out. We need coffee. We need coffee, Eric. Sorry. So, Doug and I met, dated, had many arguments, got most of the crap out before we got married. Got married after dating 5 years, and we bought a house, and so his mother was the reason I met Jesus and got the relationship. So getting back to being stubborn.
So you're how many years into this marriage now? At this point, 4 years?
At that point, no. Doug and I had dated, let me think. We had probably dated 2 or 3 years by this point. Broke up several times. I was still Dawn BC, and just not willing to play any games. Either you really or you're not, move on. And so we had broke up. So at this point, between surgeries, I think I had the second surgery, and my work came to me and said, you know what, we're done with you. They're not going to release you to ever come back, be able to do the weight ratings and lift like you did before. You know, so I had a medical separation. So I lost my job. I lost my, and I don't know why our lease was up in October, but my lease, so I lost my housing, my job, just everything. The only thing I did not lose was Matthew. And Doug's mom comes to me and says, hey, you want to go to Texas? And I'm like, oh, what for?
Is this your secular bottom?
Yes.
And I use the bottom everything. Kind of as an alcoholic phrase. I don't know if that's normal.
It was. You're awesome.
Christian
Thank you.
Movement or not.
Appreciate it. So yes, it was, because I was stuck in, I couldn't go back to work. My car died again. So I had no transportation. By this point, my mom and dad had divorced, and she's moving on to Minnesota. So I'm stuck with no backup, no car. My lease is up, and I refuse to sign a lease because I have no income to pay for it. So I'm not gonna not make my word good. And the only thing Doug and I broke up again. And actually that was the last time we broke up. And my roommate had moved out, so there was nothing. There was nothing but Matthew. And so when his mom approached me, when she said go to Texas, I said, well, what's in Texas? You know, I was already there, mind you. It was an out. And so she's like, well, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Copelands, but they're having some meeting. And I'm like, well, sure. I didn't care. Just get me out of here. So I went and left with her for probably 2 weeks, close to 2 weeks. And by day 2, so these meetings ran from Monday morning, about 8:30 they started. They had pre-service prayer to about midnight. And I had taken Matthew with me, and we were in a Coliseum all day, all night. We would leave for dinner. So I took this little guy. He was 5 years old at the time, and as long as he had cars and whatnot, he was happy. And so he sat through these meetings peaceably the whole time, you know. But I would burn him. We'd go home and make a meal in the hotel room, and I'd take him swimming while Sharon cooked. You know, just anything to get him to let a little boy be a little boy. So we ended up by Tuesday night, Jesse Duplantis was preaching, and I actually still have it on disc. He was preaching, and just the drawing, and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know, but it was that Holy Spirit drawing me, and we were way up in the nosebleed section. Sorry, Eric. We were in the nosebleed section, and I just grabbed Matthew and went down. And there was a massive crowd. There was thousands of people there. And
now, is this an altar call going down?
It's an altar call. Yep. And I gave my life to the Lord, still knowing nothing.
Do you remember what was said?
Not specifically, but it was an offer to meet Jesus. It was, would you like to meet my friend Jesus? Is what was said.
And your response was yes.
Yeah, but I didn't really know it. I was down there before. I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, do I leave? But I couldn't let go of that little boy. I had him by the hand, and it wasn't like I was dragging him, but I just couldn't let go of him. It was that. So it wasn't just for me.
Right.
It wasn't just for me. It was, but it wasn't. And I was keenly aware. Just I was super protective over him, anyways, but not to leave him behind. Got to take him with. So I gave my life to the Lord. Still didn't know anything. And but there was there's just a peace, an overwhelming peace. And so the rest of the meetings then started coming to life for me. Even though I didn't understand a lot of what they were saying, they're King James people, and that's like learning a new language in itself. But I could understand it. And then we left Texas, stopped by Arkansas. Anyways, I was gone probably 12, 14 days or so, Sharon and I were. And I pulled back in my driveway pretty late at night, and there stands Doug in my living room. and my heart just sank. I thought, what is this guy doing here, and how did he get in my house? And come to find out, he was showing up there every day to take care of. I didn't have any animals. Matt flushed all the fish, so there was so there was nothing to care for. But he was just there every day, and Cheryl was staying there, even though she didn't any longer live there. She was still staying there because I asked her to watch the house while we were gone, and so she quit staying there because he was showing up all the time. And here he had said, so we stopped and prayed before I got out of the vehicle, because I'm like, this can't go well, and even though I didn't know at the time, I got in there, and he didn't tell me that night. He probably told me years later. He said that his heart physically ached from the time I left, like he couldn't bear the chest pain. He couldn't function. He couldn't. So he was lingering in the only presence he had of me at that point. So, and he did say that he pretty much knew from the time we had dated 2 weeks that I was the one. And I'm like, well, then why does it take you 5 years? And, in God's time, because Doug, we joke about him being the anchor and me being the buoy. I'll pull you up and get you where you need to go. And he tries to slow me down or hold me back, not in a negative way, right, but he's the anchor. So, together we really do make a good team. So I had come back, had given my life to the Lord. He and I spent the whole night talking. Went to the mailbox the next day. There was several checks because I had income continuation. So somebody I did truly love, but was willing to cast away because there was a friend of his that got in the way, and I just wasn't. You know what? A marriage is two people in Jesus, and there was no room for this friend. There just wasn't. And so that was kind of that was all, not all of our struggles, but a whole lot of them. So anyways, so I get back, he's there. We managed to work things out that night, which is not my style. When I'm done, I'm done. And the checks were all sitting there. Sharon had offered, she had spoke to Rainey while we were in Texas, and on the way back offered that Matthew and I come live with them for free. They had a huge house, and like the room was massive, and it had its own entryway and all these things. And it was, this is the first time, but this is not the only time where the enemy presents everything as catastrophic. I turn and walk away and place my trust. And I didn't know at this time to place my trust, but I came back and everything had worked itself out. I had housing. I still had an income. Doug and I worked things out. My car was repaired in the driveway when I got back. Just everything I didn't ask for. Yet what brought me to the very thing that brought me to my knees, he took care of all of it. And I got to meet my best friend, Jesus. So from that point, Doug and I, it wasn't long and we were married. He was always good to Matt, and shortly after we were married, we bought a house out here. And from that point, I was panicking when we decided to have kids because I did it alone. And not that he wasn't there from the age of, Matt was almost 4, but I met him in June and Matt turned 4 in September. So there was those months that he really didn't know him. So I was a single parent really up until we got married, but he was there. Doug was there partaking, just not as a full-time, sure. It wasn't his responsibility. But he took him in, and it was a little frustrating at times. We'd go places and they would actually be like, "Oh, your dad." And I'm thinking, listen, he's not his biological father, and everybody related his looks to him. And I'm like, but God, who could do such a thing? So anyways, so bring us up to today. We got married, had twins, and and there was the point of panic just because of the being a single parent. I was panicking, not not realizing that it's real or that he really is there or there is help or any of those things, because I was in such just a single frame. I did this before. Was it easy? No.
Right.
Did it turn out well? Absolutely.
Now that's an interesting perspective, period, because it's not just with children that's
right.
Appropriate or adequate or focused. We do that as Christians over almost everything, right? Individuals is different. My submission to Christ is, or my struggle with submission is I'm kind of a control freak, which
I am
so too. Not well, yeah, when it comes to raising children too, but when it comes to everything. So then all of a sudden you're working at just doing life,
yes,
and still trying to figure out as a young Christian on how to let Jesus do his thing in your life. And I don't want to sound bleak on that, because it's cool, but what actually happens is this is a lifelong project.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know anybody who just wakes up one day and is so outside of maybe Wigglesworth or something that is or Moses himself, and he struggled with submissive authority. That learning and growing just you're complete never happens.
Right.
So
your goal is that, but it does it happen this side?
Hopefully.
I'd like to think we get a lot closer by the end, but
so you get married and you start having children, and life is perfect from that day forward, and there's no struggles or strife, and Christ is just like a 12th century Catholic painting over the house. And
no, actually, I had to let go of a whole lot. I had to share when I didn't have to share. And there were times where I actually physically, not that I can really move Doug that much, but where I shoved him out of the way to get to the babies before he could, because he was just moving too slow. So to get out of the mindset where it's all my responsibility. I got to bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, take care of Matthew, take care of everything, to all of a sudden I have to let go. Oh, you want to help decide this? Okay. And it was not easy. So the letting go in every aspect was difficult, in the sense where I just hadn't had to do it before. So yes, I knew I was married. Yes, we shared this life, but it was so much for me, actually, the worst part was letting go of my job, because I identified with my job. So I think more like a male than a female in that aspect. Coming home was not easy. It was not something, and the main reason I did it is love. I did not want somebody else raising my kids. Am I perfect? Right. Did I do right by them? Am I perfect? No. Did I do right by them? I'd like to hope so. Were there mistakes made? Absolutely. But I didn't want, and we actually talked about this. I said, I don't want children if we can't raise them. And so he was willing to. By this point, he was making more money than me, but my benefits far outweighed his. So it was a struggle. And when we found out there was two, it was a no-brainer. I knew that I had to be there for him. And there were a lot of differences. I grew up around kids and was young enough that I just thought everybody knew how to change a diaper, or everybody knew what to do. Just thought that they did, but they really didn't. He didn't. Like, he would ask me questions, and I would be like, no, thinking to myself, you don't know that? Not degrading him but just realizing that the reason you need people around you is something I don't. Right. You can see something I don't. He knew and could do many things, but this was foreign to him. This whole child rearing thing, where it was natural to me because we had babies everywhere. It was like a zoo. Growing up, there was always kids, and you just knew what to do. Or for me, I just knew what to do. And of course, then I had a caretaker position where you're taking care of other people. It's just, for me, it was just easy. But letting go of my work and my healthy paycheck and my benefits was not easy. And being hit with twins. And I believe part of the reason I had twins is my nature is to do everything I can do. And for the first 9 months, there wasn't much I could do. Just caring for them was round the clock. You know, I never got a baby that was born big enough to just sleep through the night. That didn't happen for me. But I had the heart for them. And so do I regret anything? No, not at all. And I wouldn't change anything. If I was to change anything, I'd have tore that house down and rebuilt right away. Because that's been the painful part of life. A slow, painful remodel process spanning decades.
It's amazing what God does in a retrospect or a hindsight, that I find myself saying, man, I never saw that coming, or I never would have seen this for the glory of God. You know, and kind of to intertwine a little bit of last week with this week, I'm amazed at how our testimonies overlap so much from the last 15 years, 16 years.
Yeah, we have to figure that out because, or just the way it went full circle.
Right?
Who would have thought that, well, honestly, I wasn't even considering a man taking over the children's ministry. Not because I'm biased or anything. I just, men don't usually have a heart for kids like women do. And that's not a dig. That's just,
no, it's true.
And so when I kept hearing your name and seeing your face, I was just like, really? Really? I just wouldn't have put it all together.
Right.
I and myself would have messed that up totally. And yet, how many years were we gone that we came back around? And, I do say I came back kicking and screaming. And it wasn't that, but I found a place where I could just go worship. I could stand between my 6'4" son and my 6'1" husband and just disappear. There were chairs on a flat floor, and I could just worship, receive, and get out of there.
Chairs on a flat floor.
Yeah.
For those of you who have no idea what she's talking about, is we have a very traditional looking church building here, where the floors are all sloped forward, and you kind of feel like you're leaning if you've never been in a building like that. So having a flat floor in a place to stand, you lose that wobbliness.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's not even that, it's being on display. So worship is personal to me. And if I could go behind a curtain and worship, it'd be way more free. But I like to do my own thing and not be on display. And so coming back here, that was hard on me. Because I felt like I was on display. And now I'm getting to the point where I don't care. You know what? If I raise my arms and it offends you, I do apologize, but I'm not stopping. So,
well, don't apologize either.
Well,
right. So here's, and this is a little bit of an offshoot, but this is where I think conversation is really neat. I would challenge you with not necessarily just trying to fade in or just worship on your own time. But what if God's moving you into a point of display? What if He wants you to be up front and worshiping? What if He...
Well, funny you should say that, because that is exactly what I'm receiving for the girls. And I will walk down the aisle. I don't know why I stay in the back, because I don't want to be on display. And even though I don't care, I'll close my eyes and pretend everybody's not there. Not pretend, but... No,
I totally get that.
But with these girls, I will find myself gravitating towards the front. And they'll come up and give you a hug, and the next thing you know, you open your eyes, and they're got their hands up and worshiping. Do they know what they're doing yet? Not all of them. But it doesn't matter. How do you learn?
Right.
How do you learn?
I've always been a behind-the-scenes kind of person. Go tell me to do something, and it'll get done. and I'd rather do that than anything else.
Yeah.
To be all honest with you, but now we're finding ourselves in a position where that once was awkward kind of thing is now what God is moving us towards.
It's interesting though, because, Dawn BC, when I was mad, the entire bar, the entire dance floor, the entire, they knew it.
Yeah.
They were going to know it. If I walked into a room and I was mad, by the time I was done yelling, it was silent. But I didn't care. I'm just like, just oblivious to anybody else, their feelings,
But me.
Yeah.
And now it's but God.
That's the way I hope to be, is the but God, because, getting back to the body, or getting to the body of Christ, I see how intricately woven we are. Just even all these things like Doug, Faith Riders. He bought a bike. I've never ridden with him, and I forgot how much I loved it until I got back on. There's just a freedom. There's just I can't get into all of it, but there's and it didn't bring back the bad memories. It didn't bring back the way I used to ride before, and the way I ride today.
Well, let me take this to a prophetic stance. So where our families have intertwined over the last 15 or 17 years.
At least, because Rebecca was pregnant and Eric's 16, so it's at least 16
right?
years.
And he will be 17 next month.
True.
Right, so that's actually pushing that 17, 18
Yes,
years.
because she was pregnant, and I remember the day that baby was born. I remember them announcing, Rebecca and Jason will not be here because she's having a baby.
And that is so funny, because I remember a point in time where, we went to church all the time. I didn't care if we made it or not. Even when we started coming here, it was, if there was an excuse to not go, let's not go. But then I remember moving to this point where, man, and I don't have a where it changed thing, but all of a sudden I'm like, it's time to go to church. It's time to go ahead, it's time to be with the family. And
that comes with growth.
Right?
So I can say, if you can understand this for the value that it is that my children actually saved my life and caused me to go in a direction that living for myself, I would have never made it. But because I had you can't see that little life and it not melt your heart. There's just no way. There's just no way. And it just brought everything up so if you go into my house, there's not a picture on the wall. It's all photographs. One day I realized that even though it seems so hard, that I started with my bedroom wall, and when I open my eyes, all I see are photographs of them, and I picked out some of my favorite ones. There's too many to put on the wall, but of the reason I get up every day. And then if they made something, I'd stick it in between. And to some people that would be atrocious. To me, it's not. And so the whole house is in photographs, and what the Lord has allowed Doug and I to build as a unit. And has it all been fun and games? No. But it's been good overall. It has really been good. And,
you wouldn't give it up for the world, would you?
No, I would not. And, things have been rough at times. His heart attack at 45 changed a lot of things. But he lived. So, as long as we still got life, we got hope.
Right.
And, and I see how much his boys need him. They don't let him rest.
Well, look honestly. At that. Take that hope to the next level too. We have life here, and we have this hope in Christ, but there's a whole nother level of life.
Yes.
Where we just hope is blown out the window, and reality says, we have life more abundant coming even after this. that which is one of the reasons that makes life now
Worth living.
and so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can say I'm definitely more intentional.
Right.
And when I can't imagine life without Christ. Do you ever have a baby and look back just even a few days? You cannot imagine life without that child.
Right.
That's the way it was for me when I rolled over. Like on the rare occasion Doug would pick that baby up and walk, my heart would sink for a brief moment. I'd look over in that cradle, and where's my baby? And you can't imagine life without him. At that point, if that child didn't live, it would be devastating.
Right.
And they're only 3 days old, or only, I mean, that's the way I feel about Jesus. Is life without him is not worth living. It's not. And people think that we're bound and by laws and rules. No, we're bound by love. And with love, that's all you need in this life. So I didn't even get into impact, but wouldn't it be like God to, he told Doug and I coming back here, he told Doug and I to, it's not what you can receive, it's what you can give.
Right.
And so then we received the word, Doug specifically did, that we needed to come alongside you and Rebecca and get your job done. Okay, so I didn't know what that looked like. I'm thinking I can organize, I can clean a mean toilet, I can do all kinds of things.
How's that working out for you?
Well, I still clean the mean toilets, but not in the sense that. So it was totally what I didn't expect. You had come to me and asked me what I thought about running a girls program, and I'm like, I need some time, not because of anything other than girls. You asked me to run a girls program. I don't know girls. I have the majority of my friends were guys, and they're simple. They say what they mean. They mean what they say for the most part. They aren't complicated. They are, they're so different. And then I have 4 sons and only 1 daughter. And you ask me to run a girls program, and I keep hearing doing the things I can't do. There's no way I could do that without the truth. And it took me 3 months to get my answer. And you're like, I knew that 3 months ago. And I'm thinking, then why didn't you tell me?
Some days I wish I could.
Yeah. So, and, it got kicked off a year earlier than you thought. And it has been profound. And I have learned things about myself walking through things with these girls. So, it was doing something I could not do. Without leaning on him, it wouldn't work. There's nothing in the natural that I would have for these girls whatsoever without him.
I'm always weirded out at times where God picks those that are least qualified for a very specific purpose so that he is allowed to do it.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that we struggle with as parents, as Christians, as spouses, is that we're not being called because we're qualified. Right. We're being called because we're submissive, and through our inadequacy, God just reigns supreme.
Well, and that's what's so exciting about it. These kids that say, I can't, I'm not good enough, I'm not, and I'm thinking this is perfect soil.
Right?
It's perfect soil, because they really feel it. And what's great about teenagers is the fact that what they say and what they feel are real to them. And I keep encouraging them, get on the other side of that. Yep. Give it 5-10 years, not even 10 years. Just get past those teen years, and you're going to look back and you're going to be like, that was nothing. That was nothing. Yeah. And if we can take that same approach to the enemy brings, he'll bring things to trip you up. He'll bring mountains to drop in your path, if you will. He'll open up the floodgates of hell if he could, but it's nothing. It is nothing.
I am amazed at how many times you hear crap like, enjoy your childhood because this is the best time of your life, or enjoy high school because this is the greatest time of your life. No, none of that's actually true. Right. Some of those are the worst times of your life, And they all will always get better because the hope that Christ brings is something that's still coming. It's still coming.
Yes, and once you know that, it is an endless opportunity. Absolutely endless.
Right?
That if, I'll refer to Jesus as, you want to be one of the cool kids, get to know him. He will show you things to come. He will walk you through whatever somebody can throw at you. And they'll be sitting there scratching their head saying, how? And so I relate it to that. He's your answer to everything. And kids will grab hold of absolute truth, and they'll hold fast to it. And so, it may be only 30 kids that I get to have an effect on, but I hope it's profound enough that it causes them to grab hold of that truth and let it walk them through whatever storms of life.
Can you say that again? It may only be 30 kids that you have.
It may only be 30 kids that we have on Wednesday nights.
Yep.
But I hope that not just me, but the women in general have such a profound effect on them that they know how to grab hold of that truth, to walk them through any and all storms of life, and come out on the other end with a grin on their face, knowing that they've got an army behind them, knowing that, the battle belongs to him, just knowing that no matter what you're faced with, life or death, that you're a winner on the other side. And how you get from point A to B is irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
It is. It really is. There is something really profound in what you just said, though, is those 30 kids that you get an impact on here will have spouses that doubles to 60. They will have children, sometimes multiples. That's 120. That's one generation.
And I hope they take it to the rest.
And it will go generation after generation. The seeds we plant are eternal. That is one of the reasons that I'm excited about doing what we're doing with testimony today, because as uncomfortable as it is to talk about some of this stuff, people get to see that just because it seems like life is burdensome or cumbersome at times, it's really not. It's God using certain events to shape your life, your outlook, your perspective, your emotions, your faith. And when we let him do that is when it starts to come together. Not because it didn't come together, it's perspective change.
Yeah, it's a yes and amen. I mean, the enemy will see to it, if you allow it, for you to forever be in torment. Absolutely, right? Forever. And just this morning, Doug and I established things that I don't have to pick up again. We got the word out. We spoke the word. We're standing on the word. And we can take it to the bank that the outcome will be as such, because absolute truth is absolute truth. So, you can fight and win a battle without leaving your bedroom. Yes. And that's the powerful, profound effect. You can fight and win a battle around the world without leaving where you're at right now. And when these kids, and I know I'm speaking to the kids, but when we as a group, kids are easy. We always think they're so hard, but they're easy. Kids are easy because they recognize that Holy Spirit. They recognize that truth. I always say kids and dogs are excellent judges of character.
Yes, they are.
If my dog will not stop barking at a driver, you can take it to the bank that there's something in them that is not upright. Kids when they're reluctant to go up to someone, I never forced my kids. If they're like no and grabbed hold of you, I'll grab you back. Let's just carry on. I would never force them to do anything, because there's something that I feel like throughout life, sometimes you're especially Dawn BC, when you have a hardened heart, you can't necessarily discern and pick up on those things.
Right.
But kids are not hardened. They are not hardened.
I'd like to put you on the spot for a minute here.
Okay.
Would you commit to coming back and doing one more week and next week maybe doing a focus on that intertwining of my testimony and your testimony. I hadn't actually intended to do that, but I think God really laid it on my heart that it shows a couple of things. One, that we were born again 20 years ago.
Yeah, 25.
Yeah, whatever, more.
Something like that.
Yeah, right. But he's not done working.
No.
Right, and he doesn't stop.
Well, and he's brought us to a very unique place. And we can come back, because I would like to touch on some of those things where he's brought our walk side by side for how long, we don't know.
Right. And by the way, that'll be, I'm guessing, a much shorter episode than the last two. But yeah, if you would be interested in doing that, I would love to do that.
Okay.
And then that would actually give us a little bit of an opportunity to speak on where he is moving today and in the last couple of years, for sure, would be nice.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I guess let's just pray us out of this one, and we'll go on. Father God, we just thank you so much for making things, I don't want to say happen, but for bringing things to light and allowing us to see how life is important, and not just my life or Dawn's life or our children, but that we have an effect, that when we let you work in our lives, that is a ripple that is so profound that we do not understand the generational effect it has. So, Father, I just want to thank you for that ability to love on one another, to embrace one another, to speak truth into each other's lives. And we just ask that you continue to let it roll out, Father, that you're bringing hearts and minds into receiving messages that you just want out there. Father, help us to continue to encourage one another, and to sharing testimony, and to living life that you want us to have as children of the living God, as your followers with life more abundant. We just want to thank you and praise you today in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you guys very much for stopping in or checking out the podcast. And I would encourage you just to continue looking at the website. All of our church services are posted. We will probably separate the testimonies into a different section or group, and we'll put those out online. But I just want you to know that there is hope in Christ for a better tomorrow, a better future, not just here, but in eternity also. So bless you, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.